I used to believe betrayal would be loud, screaming, slamming doors. Instead, it was quiet enough to steal my breath. My mother stood in a packed courtroom crying softly as she said, "We gave you every opportunity and you threw it away." My father didn't defend me. He just nodded. My brother stared straight ahead, already counting my losses. My lawyer stayed calm, too calm. Then the judge stopped reading. He looked up slowly and said he'd seen my company mentioned in the news last week. Before I explain how it reached that point, hit like, comment, city, and share if family ever crossed you. I didn't grow up in a broken home. That's the part that still confuses people when I tell this story. From the outside, my family looked polished, comfortable, the kind of family neighbors pointed to and said, "They've got it figured out." My father ran a long-established financial business in Boston. He loved structure, legacy, and predictability. My mother loved appearances, perfect dinners, perfect smiles, perfect timing for tears. And then there was Marcus, my older brother, the heir. The one everyone expected to step into my father's world without ever questioning whether he wanted to or deserved to. I was the other one, not the rebel in a dramatic way. I didn't scream or slam doors. I just didn't fit. While Marcus talked about portfolios and networking dinners, I was fascinated by systems, by how things broke, how they could be protected, how unseen threats work. I once tried to explain my ideas over dinner, sketching on a napkin while the roast cooled. My father watched for a minute, then smiled like you do at a child pretending to run a business with play money. "That's a phase," he said. "You'll grow out of it." My mother laughed lightly and changed the subject. Those moments piled up. Holidays where Marcus was praised for things he hadn't even finished yet. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Compliments that always came with conditions. "You're smart, but you're talented if only you." When I left to build my own life, it wasn't dramatic. No final argument, no ultimatums, just distance. I married James, took his last name, built something quietly, intentionally, without announcing it to anyone who once told me I'd fail. And it worked. Not overnight, not easily. There were years when my entire world fit inside a cramped apartment and a laptop balanced on a folding table. Long nights, missed events, cold coffee. I learned to survive on focus and stubbornness. I learned how to keep going without applause. What I didn't do was tell my family. I didn't correct their assumptions. When Marcus joked that I was still figuring things out, I let him. When my mother asked too sweetly if I was okay financially, I said I was fine and left it there. It felt safer that way, like keeping a door closed in a house where you know a storm is coming. For years, silence protected me. I never understood at first that my silence was giving them something they desperately needed. Time. Time to watch from a distance. Time to speculate. Time to decide what they believed I was worth and, more importantly, what they believed I deserved. They had spent years assuming they understood my limits, and because I stopped explaining myself, they were forced to fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. By the time they finally realized I had built something substantial, something that had survived without their approval, they didn't react with pride. They reacted with discomfort. My success didn't announce itself with headlines or dramatic celebrations. There was no champagne, no cameras, no moment where the world suddenly recognized what I had accomplished. It came quietly, almost invisibly, through small signs that meant far more to me than public praise ever could. A contract renewed without the client asking for a discount. A customer who once questioned every decision eventually stopped asking whether something could be done and began asking how quickly we could do it. New employees joined the company, trusting me enough to place their careers and their families' financial security in my hands. Those moments mattered. They reminded me that what I was building wasn't imaginary. It wasn't luck. It wasn't some temporary streak that would disappear the moment someone challenged me. It was real. I also learned something else along the way. The less my family knew about my life, the more peaceful my life became. So I became careful. I didn't put my name on every article. I didn't post pictures that revealed how quickly the company was expanding. I avoided talking about revenue, new contracts, investors, or future plans. When someone asked what I was doing, I gave the simplest answer possible. Technology, consulting, keeping busy. That was enough. I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was protecting something I had worked too hard to build. I had finally learned that not everyone who asks about your progress is asking because they want to celebrate it. For a while, keeping my distance worked. Then Marcus began appearing again. At first, it wasn't obvious. He didn't call me directly or demand anything. Instead, he started leaving small comments in family group chats. He would make casual remarks during holidays, the kind that could easily be dismissed if I challenged them. Things are pretty volatile in your industry right now. Must be stressful without any real stability. He always smiled when he said things like that. That was what made them so difficult to confront. They sounded like concern, but there was always something underneath them. A question, a judgment, a reminder that he still believed I was one bad decision away from proving him right. My father began asking questions as well. Strangely, they weren't questions about how I was doing. He rarely asked whether I was happy or whether I needed anything. Instead, he wanted to talk about risk, liability, business failures, consequences. He spoke as though he were giving me advice, but every conversation carried the same message. People like me didn't understand how dangerous success could become. I began noticing the change in my mother, too. She suddenly wanted updates. She wanted to know where I was working, who I was working with, how often I traveled, and whether I had considered coming home more frequently. Then she suggested that maybe I should reconnect with my father. Maybe we could talk. Maybe he could help me identify new opportunities. That word bothered me. Opportunities. It sounded harmless, but I knew my family well enough to recognize when a word was carrying more weight than it appeared to. It wasn't an invitation. It was an evaluation. They weren't asking how they could support me. They were trying to determine how much I had. Then came the dinner. Nothing explosive happened. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic accusation. Marcus simply mentioned that he'd heard I had finally managed to land something decent. He laughed afterward, but his eyes didn't. His eyes stayed on me. He was waiting. He wanted me to confirm the rumor. He wanted to see my reaction. He wanted to know how far I had gone without him knowing. I smiled, changed the subject, and continued eating. That night, however, I told James that something felt wrong. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He simply listened. He had seen enough of my family's behavior to recognize the pattern. Maybe he didn't know every detail, but he understood the structure of it. Curiosity becomes entitlement when certain people discover that someone they once dismissed has achieved something valuable. And once entitlement takes hold, boundaries start looking like insults. 2 weeks later, the envelope arrived. It was thick, official. My name was printed across the front with such precise professionalism that, for a moment, I simply stood there staring at it. I still had my keys in my hand. I remember thinking that the envelope looked strangely confident, as though it already knew how the story was supposed to end. I opened it. The first words barely made sense. Bankruptcy, petition, creditor, amount owed. Then I saw Marcus's name. I read the document once, then again, then a third time. My hands remained steady. My breathing didn't change. There was no dramatic collapse, no tears, no panic. What I felt was much colder. They weren't asking me questions anymore. They had already made their decision, and now they intended to force me to defend myself in court. I sat at the kitchen table and read every page slowly. The claims were unbelievable. According to the filing, my company owed Marcus nearly $2 million. They claimed there had been unpaid obligations. They claimed I had ignored bills. They claimed I had signed agreements years earlier. The language was calm, professional, and disturbingly confident. That frightened me more than anger would have. Anger is emotional. This wasn't. This was organized. Someone had spent time constructing this. Someone had gathered documents. Someone had decided that a legal process could be used as a weapon. I immediately called my lawyer. I explained exactly what had arrived and read through the claims with her. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Then she spoke. "They're attempting to trigger a bankruptcy process." I asked her why. She answered carefully. "Not because the claims are strong. Because the process itself creates disruption. It creates delays, uncertainty, legal expenses, and doubt." I stared at the paperwork. "So they know it won't survive scrutiny. That's what it looks like. And they're hoping I'll panic." Exactly. That was when I finally understood how serious the situation was. Marcus hadn't simply become jealous. This wasn't some impulsive act committed in anger. Something like this required planning. It required cooperation. It required someone to approve the idea and decide that crossing this line was acceptable. I thought about my mother's silences. My father's obsession with discipline. The way they always closed ranks whenever something threatened the version of themselves they wanted everyone to believe. I didn't ask my lawyer whether my parents were involved. I already knew. Over the next several days, I gathered everything: bank records, invoices, contracts, payment confirmations, audited statements, emails, tax documents. Every piece of information I had preserved over the years suddenly became more valuable than I could have imagined. My lawyer requested everything she could use to establish the truth. She wasn't frightened. That calmness helped me remain calm too. At one point she looked at me and said, "This only works if we allow them to control the narrative." I understood what she meant. They wanted chaos. I would give them organization. They wanted me emotional. I would remain composed. They wanted me to look reckless. I would bring records. They wanted accusations. I would bring evidence. For the first time, I realized that I didn't need to defeat them emotionally. I only needed to let the facts speak. I didn't call my mother. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't send my father an angry message. Silence had once been my way of avoiding conflict. Now it became something different. Strategy. If they wanted a courtroom, I would meet them there. If they wanted to tell a story about me, I would allow them to tell it. Because eventually, every story has to meet the evidence. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not because of the temperature, because of the atmosphere. Every movement seemed amplified. Every chair scraping against the floor sounded deliberate. I arrived early and sat quietly beside my lawyer. She had everything organized. Documents were stacked neatly in front of her. Financial records, payment histories, contracts, audits, correspondence. Looking at those papers gave me an unexpected sense of peace. They were proof that I had spent years doing things properly. Then my family entered. My mother came first. She was dressed in black. Marcus followed, looking relaxed and confident, speaking quietly with his attorney. My father came in last. His posture was rigid. His eyes remained fixed ahead. None of them looked at me. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted affection, but because their refusal to acknowledge me confirmed something I had been struggling to accept. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They had chosen a side. When the hearing began, Marcus's attorney spoke first. His presentation was polished. He described my company as unstable. He suggested that I had expanded too quickly. He questioned my management decisions. He talked about unpaid obligations and supposed financial irresponsibility. He made everything sound reasonable, almost inevitable. Then my mother began crying. It was quiet, controlled. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue and shook her head as if watching everything she had feared come true. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "We gave her every opportunity," she said. "She threw it all away." I felt something tighten inside me, not because the words shocked me, because she delivered them as though they were established facts. My father gave a small nod, just once. That tiny movement hurt more than anything else. Marcus remained still. He seemed convinced that the courtroom would confirm everything he had believed about me. My lawyer didn't react. She didn't interrupt unnecessarily. She waited. The judge continued reviewing the documents, page after page. The room became almost completely silent. Then he stopped. He removed his glasses and placed them on the bench. He looked at the documents again. Then he looked up. Counsel approached the bench. Both attorneys stood. Marcus's lawyer walked forward confidently, but halfway there, his expression changed. My lawyer remained composed. They spoke quietly. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Marcus's attorney's face lose color. When they returned, the judge remained silent for several seconds. Then he spoke. "I have a question regarding the company at the center of this petition." Marcus finally looked up. The judge continued. "I came across information about this company recently, not in these filings, in a published report." My mother's crying stopped. Marcus glanced toward his attorney. The judge described the company as a rapidly growing technology business that had attracted significant attention. Then he looked at Marcus. "Does that sound familiar, Mr. Whitmore?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, with respect, the defendant is overstating the size of her operation." The judge raised his hand. "I haven't finished." Marcus sat down. The judge turned another page. "I'm reviewing audited financial statements showing consistent growth and substantial reserves." Another page. "I see no evidence here suggesting insolvency." Another page. and I see payment records that don't correspond with the obligations described in this petition." Marcus's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Then the judge picked up another document. "There is something else." He examined it carefully. "Independent signature analysis." He looked directly at Marcus. "These signatures do not appear to belong to the defendant." The room went silent. My father's posture changed. My mother's hand stopped moving. Marcus looked toward his attorney. My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we are prepared to demonstrate each inconsistency. The payments referenced in the petition do not exist. The invoices cited were never issued. The alleged loan is inconsistent with the petitioner's own financial records." She paused. "And there are serious concerns regarding the authenticity of the documents." Marcus suddenly stood. "This is absurd." The judge looked at him. "What's concerning to me isn't her defense." He paused. "It's your certainty." Marcus stopped speaking. The judge looked back at the documents. "Someone in this courtroom has presented information that is not supported by the evidence." His voice became even quieter. "And based on what I'm reviewing, that person is not the defendant." My mother's eyes moved toward my father. He didn't look back. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The judge finally delivered the decision. "The petition is dismissed." He paused. "With prejudice." Then he added that the matter would be referred for further review. The room changed instantly. The confidence disappeared. Court officers approached Marcus and his attorney. My family suddenly looked much smaller than they had when they entered. As everyone began gathering their belongings, my mother reached for my arm. "Alexis," she whispered. Her voice was frightened now. "We were only trying to help." I looked at her hand. Then I looked at her face. "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to prove that you were right." I walked away. My father called my name. I didn't stop. The courtroom doors closed behind me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for something terrible to happen. I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't preparing for another attack. I was simply walking forward. The consequences didn't arrive immediately. They rarely do. They came gradually. Marcus stopped contacting me. Then his attorney stopped. Eventually, fragments of information began reaching me through people who were no longer part of my daily life. Questions were being asked. Records were being reviewed. People were investigating what had happened. Nobody used dramatic language. They didn't need to. The certainty Marcus once carried had disappeared. My parents tried a different approach. My mother left a voicemail. Her voice was gentle, careful. She said no one had intended for things to become so serious. My father sent a message about family. He talked about reputation. He talked about mistakes. He suggested that people shouldn't be permanently defined by one bad decision. I read the message several times. Then I put my phone down. I didn't answer, not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood the difference between forgiveness and permission. What they had done wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. And decisions don't stop being decisions simply because the consequences become painful. Meanwhile, my company continued moving forward. Meetings resumed. Projects continued. Deadlines returned. My employees showed up every morning and did their jobs. They didn't demand explanations. They didn't question my character. They trusted me. That trust meant more than any courtroom victory. For the first time, I understood that success wasn't really about proving my family wrong. It wasn't about watching Marcus lose. It wasn't about seeing my parents embarrassed. The real victory was realizing that I no longer needed their approval. At home, everything became quieter. I slept better. I thought more clearly. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I stopped wondering what accusation might arrive next. The tension that had lived inside me for years slowly disappeared, and eventually, my success stopped feeling like something I had to defend. I had spent so much of my life trying to convince people that I was capable. Now I understood that I didn't need to convince anyone. The evidence was already there. My company existed. My employees trusted me. My clients stayed. My records were clean. My future belonged to me. I didn't win because my family suffered. I won because I refused to become the person they expected me to be. I stood still. I stayed calm. And eventually, the truth did what truth has a remarkable habit of doing. It survived. That experience taught me something I wish I had understood years earlier. Family isn't simply the people who share your blood. It isn't determined by a last name. It isn't guaranteed by history. Family is made up of the people who remain beside you when believing the truth becomes uncomfortable. Some people love you as long as you remain small enough for them to understand. They love you when you need them. They love you when you ask permission. They love you when your achievements don't threaten their place in your life. But when you grow beyond the role they assigned you, their love can suddenly turn into resentment. They may call your boundaries disrespect. They may call your independence arrogance. They may call your success luck. And sometimes, when they can no longer control your life, they will try to control the story people tell about you. That's when you have to remember who you are. You don't have to fight every accusation. You don't have to answer every insult. You don't have to expose every person who has wronged you. Sometimes the strongest response is simply to keep your records clean, your mind clear, and your life moving forward. Let people believe whatever they want. Eventually, reality catches up with every lie. And when it does, you won't need to celebrate. You won't need revenge. You'll simply walk away knowing that you protected the one thing they could never take from you, the life you built when nobody was watching. If you've ever experienced something similar, remember that you aren't the only one. Sometimes the people closest to you can become the people who understand you the least. Sometimes protecting your peace means creating distance. And sometimes the hardest lesson is accepting that not everyone who calls themselves family deserves unlimited access to your life. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to succeed. You are allowed to become someone your family never expected you to be. And you are allowed to walk away when their love comes with conditions that require you to stay small. If this story reminded you of something in your own life, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from and what lesson this story taught you. And if you enjoy powerful stories about family, betrayal, resilience, and the unexpected consequences of people's choices, subscribe for more.